So, I mean, I want to now, I'm going to first introduce our panelists and the debate teams, and then I'm going to introduce our moderator who was kind enough to step in when we had to cancel the Bloomberg folks. Okay, to my immediate right is Blair Davies. Blair has been in and out of Australian government. He was not only the CEO and president of the Queensland Trade Organization, or taxi organization, but then became, for many, many years, and after leaving and coming, still is the CEO of the Australian Taxi Industry Association, which represents taxi business owners for the entire continent and country of Australia. He left to become Queensland Business Commissioner and went back to government, but now he's back at the ATIA and has seen a lot of things, including deregulation over the years, and has heard some very good viewpoints on those issues. To my next right, and in the middle of this panel on my right, is Rich Antonacci. Rich Antonacci is the Chief Operating Officer of Signature Bank, which has significant investments in the medallion industry, in not only New York and Chicago, but he also has a rich history of working at other financial institutions, has been doing this for a very, very long time. Understands economics, understands the financial implications for his borrowers, and is a lender who has a stake in this and really has a point of view that needs to be addressed. Last but not least, on my far, far right is Bill Rouse, who's an attorney by trade, but is also the owner of one of the largest, if not the largest, cab fleets in California, Yellow Cab of Los Angeles. They also have business interests and operations in San Diego, Nashville, Tennessee, and Charlotte. Bill is very, very involved as a former president of the Taxi, Limousine, and Paratransit Association, but also is very involved with TPAC, which is the state organization in California that has been fighting the battle against the TNCs and the PUC issues that have surfaced. He went to the University of Southern California, was been in the bar in '92. He is an excellent lawyer, by the way, and an excellent advocate, and the Taxi, Limousine, and Paratransit Association is a major player, a major trade group that has been in the middle of this issue day in and day out. On my left, on my left here, first person is Jeff Matthew. Jeff is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Wings, formerly known as Takengo, but we'll just say Wings for now. He is a TNC in California, and he has run from the top down a new operation which is devoted to ride sharing. It may not be the exact business model as everybody else, but is certainly somebody who represents a point of view on the sharing economy. He's a graduate of the University of Southern California, and we're glad you made the trip out here, and we thank you for coming. We also have Wesley Hotzog, who's joined us at the last moment, and thank you for coming, from the Institute for Justice. The last time I saw Wes, he was cross-examining me in court as an expert witness, so you know, there's nothing like a lawsuit to bring people together. The Institute for Justice is an economic liberty public interest law firm. In fact, I first got involved with you years ago, fighting on your side, fighting for the commuter van industry, which was you know, being inundated with unruly regulations from the city council. But now they've taken on the issue of minimum fares and minimum waiting times, bringing several lawsuits around the country that Wes has personally handled, including the St. Paul, Minnesota, Portland, Oregon, and the one we were involved in, which was Nashville, Tennessee, which has been resolved. He got his law degree from the University of Washington, where he completed a judicial externship with Judge Sanders, and now he's been working for the Institute for Justice full time. So we have lawyers on both sides, we have trade industry folks, we have people who run businesses. I think it's a great mix. And again, Lyft, Uber, you want to join us, feel free. If Sunil Paul wants the conference in, we'll take his call. But it's now my great pleasure to introduce the man who made the journey from New York to NOLA in a green and yellow cab with our driver of the year, Pete Donahue. Pete, thank you for doing this. We have a couple of hockey pucks for you in case things get out of control. Pete has been the transportation beat reporter for the New York Daily News for a very long time. And I'm trying to get used to having conversations with him where I'm actually now all off the record all the time and not being tape recorded. But Pete is a very smart reporter. In fact, there are other reporters that I shoot from the hip on. You don't shoot from the hip. Pete gets into the issues. The interviews go on and on and on with probing questions, but he's very fair, very objective, and he's been studying and dealing with this issue as well as, quite frankly, mass transit and other issues as well. So let's give a big round of applause once again for our panelists and for Pete, and let the games begin.
I guess a little bit on format. I just thought I would begin by asking some questions, specifically to some of the panelists here. At some point, I'd like to get some of you folks asking questions directly, and hopefully we'll have a good, healthy exchange of ideas here. So, since I write for the New York Daily News, I thought I'd start with a little story that we would probably call a taxi ride from hell on the front page of New York Tabloid. One of those incidences out in California where a woman got a ride with an Uber-related driver. She was intoxicated. Instead of taking her home, she wound up in a seedy motel and woke up next to the driver who had his shirt on for some reason. So my question is, and I'll put it to you guys first over here. What do you say to the view that you're not as safe with a so-called unregulated driver? Just a rideshare driver who is not deemed a professional, who doesn't go through like what we have as a TLC school, professionalism, extensive background checks. How do we address that as safety concerns?
Thank you for the question. Can everybody hear me? We are regulated by California. We received a permit as a TNC in California, and part of the regulation in California is mainly a regulation on safety. California basically said it's okay for people to give rides who are not professional drivers using their personal vehicles, as long as the websites that are creating these opportunities and riders and drivers to match up do background checks, criminal background checks on every driver, as well as vehicle inspections. And we are required to have $1 million liability insurance in case of any incident. So California basically instituted rules, mandated rules for these instances of personal drivers giving rides to be safe. And they said, as long as you do these safety requirements, you're going to be fine.
And who does the background checks?
We are required to provide the CPUC with the company that does the background checks, so they're supposed to agree that the organization doing the background checks is qualified for that. In our case, we use Sterling, which is a company with 2,500 employees, a global background check company that does national checks, state checks, as well as international checks. And so the drivers cannot have criminal backgrounds, and they cannot have more than 3 points for minor infractions in the last 3 years. They can't have any drunk driving, intoxicated, or reckless driving, or driving without under suspended license in the last 7 years. No major infractions. And then we have to quarterly check the Department of Motor Vehicle records to make sure that nothing has happened in the last 3 months, every 3 months. And then the vehicle inspections are done by Firestone. In our case, they can be done by any regulated, licensed automotive repair facility. So they can go to Firestone, and there's a 19-point checklist of items that each car needs to have, including good brakes, good tires, as well as 17 other points. And then the facility signs off and gives them an inspection pass. And that has to be yes, the regulation in California has been geared towards allowing competition, allowing personal drivers to be able to get rides, but making sure that everybody's safe.
Bill, I'd like you to respond to that. Maybe speak directly to the California model. But just basically, what are your safety concerns? Is what you've heard here described, sufficient?
Well, not at all. These are issues that obviously touch on the safety of the public, but they also touch on the willingness of the companies to actually take responsibility for their own actions. The system devised by the PUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, is totally inadequate to protect the public. First of all, the background checks that are allowed there are performed by the companies themselves with no governmental oversight. The databases that they access are completely incomplete in that they only look at convictions from the specific jurisdictions that are reporting into the database, and that is not all jurisdictions, and it does not touch on other things that might be relevant to a particular agency's evaluation of the driver's suitability to drive, such as if there's pending charges and the like. And so we're dealing with an incomplete database as well as no oversight. And so as was well documented in April on NBC News, as well as in several other news sources, it is easy to pass drivers through the system even though they have felonies. In addition, it's well known in the Los Angeles area that many of the TNCs who have been arrested, and there are hundreds and hundreds of TNCs who have been arrested for picking up at Los Angeles International Airport, have felonies on their record. We hear from the police department that at least 8 of them are registered sex offenders. So the system that's in place is completely inadequate and fails to protect the public. The problem is that the PUC was well aware of all this at the time of the rulemaking, and the PUC, which also suspended its ex parte rules and allowed for a cozy rulemaking relationship between themselves and the TNCs, has ignored the testimony not only of the cab industry, finding to dismiss the cab industry as having too much skin in the game, but has ignored the testimony of the California Highway Patrol, the Department of Insurance, and various other objective parties providing input. The companies are doing the vetting of the passenger. They're vetting the passengers, they're vetting the drivers, they're vetting the vehicles, they're matching them all together. Yet they want to disclaim any responsibility for the work that they're doing. This is an issue of cost. It's an issue of cost shifting. They don't want to take on the cost. They want to grease the wheels to allow passengers to come through. Uber recently announced in Dallas that they can get a driver through their system in 10 minutes. That is patently obvious that they are not doing an adequate background check. If they can get a driver activated in 10 minutes. Can I just say one more thing? I want to express appreciation for Jeff from Wings coming in. I don't know a lot about the way Wings operates. I can comment on the PUC rules and the inadequacy of the PUC rules, and I certainly have a lot of information about what goes on in Uber. But to be honest with you, I just don't have a lot of information about what goes on.
Well, let me go back over here, Jeff. I mean, background checks. Do you have a problem with regulations as far as mandating background checks, and for both sides, who should do the background checks?
No, we don't at all have a problem with background checks. Background checks, reliable inspections, reliable insurance, these are all no-brainers because they're pro-consumer regulations. They should apply equally to taxi cabs, of course. But our skin in this game are targeting the anti-consumer regulations that are designed to protect taxi cab companies from competition, not these sorts of regulations that are obviously designed to protect consumers from harm.
So I want to talk a little bit about the term ride sharing. you know, some say it's a bit of a misnomer. Where is the sharing? I mean, it seems like just a regular business transaction. I want to ride, I request a ride, the app, I pay the app, and I pay the driver. How is that not a for-hire service that would fall under to regulations of traditional regulations that are out there now?
It's sort of a hybrid. The original model behind Wings, the idea came from when I used to always travel to airports. I always thought there's probably a husband or a wife driving their loved one to the airport in my area, in my neighborhood at that time. And I was puzzled because I was fascinated with the idea of being able to figure out who those people are. And that was the genesis of the idea. Is basically people already going to the airport filling empty seats in cars. And I would be able to give them $20 and they'd be happy because they wouldn't get the $20 otherwise. And we'd eliminate a vehicle from the road going to the airport. So basically now Wings offers that. We want to offer every airport in the country the opportunity to have all their employees, the people working in luggage, baggage, people working at Starbucks on the airport grounds, all the people parking, the thousands of people parking in these large airport employee parking lots, the opportunity to get paid when they're commuting to work and pick up a passenger who may be in their neighborhood at 8 a.m. when they need to get a flight. And then when they go home at 5, we could pick up a passenger who's going home, arriving at the airport. So we always had an altruistic idea when we started this originally just a hobby, a project. And now we are offering that. And this is what we want to offer to airports and offer to pay a fee for each trip. To be fair.
How is it ride sharing? I mean, you know, I guess answer for some of the, if you agree with positions that Uber and Lyft and others have put out there. But how is that not a commercial enterprise? How is that not just basically operating as an electronic delivery base? You're matching a consumer with a driver.
So it's a hybrid. What's happening is there is a melding of personal vehicles and commercial vehicles today because now you can easily match up with people. So this is no different from what happened in college rideshare boards or even Craigslist on the rideshare side on Craigslist where, hey, I'm going from San Francisco to LA tomorrow. For $50, you can go with me. This has been happening for years. So basically, this is a system where it's easier to use these types of matchups. So it becomes a melding of sort of making money from your current vehicle and continuing to use your personal vehicle to go off on weekends with your family and to go to work, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where the disruption is. It seems like this needs to be regulated in that way. How do we make this safe while allowing it to happen? Because it's melding of this deprofessionalization or professionalization. Either way, we look at it, the issue.
To respond, how is this, in your opinion, is this a for-hire business, and why is that distinction important?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Ride sharing is exclusive hire. It's a trip that the driver otherwise wasn't going to make. They go to pick up a passenger at the passenger's origin, drop the passenger off at their destination, and then they go look for another passenger. It's on demand. It's for reward. They are all definitions of a standard taxi service in jurisdictions around the world. Ride sharing sounds as though it's actually an efficient use of a journey that was already going to take place. We call that carpooling and distinguish between them, but it sounds like carpooling. It is nothing like carpooling. And in fact, what it is, it's an alternative to the taxi service. Just picking up on a point before, we're told that ride sharing is actually an innovation. It's a revolutionary change to our society. Isn't it interesting that this innovation is supposed to be taking us to a better place when we look at things like safety in terms of criminal history checks, as opposed to going to the best possible performance, so fingerprinting in this country, going through exhaustive databases. In fact, it's gone for the cheapest option. It's outsourced the activity to a third party, not a regulatory party, and it's actually gone to a base level. In terms of inspections of vehicles, as opposed to actually putting that through some scrutiny, it's not there either. Safety is an important issue, and it needs to be at the highest affordable level. If we're going to innovate in that space, we should do so. In the case of ride-sharing, the standard service out there delivered by UberX, by Lyft, it's actually a pseudo taxi service. It's an unregulated transportation service, and what it does need to do is actually to play on the same level playing field as taxis. The regulations that apply to taxis have been put in there for good measure, and so the criminal history checking that applies to taxi drivers, it should apply to people providing that same service.
Would you agree that fingerprinting, more exhaustive criminal background checks, throughout jurisdictions would be acceptable on your side?
I mean, I already have.
We are okay with regulation, and we are following basically everything that we have been mandated to do in California. So we have never had any instances of any sort of criminal activity in our system to date. So it seems to be working pretty well right now.
Right. Let me switch to something. I drove down here from New York. Hopefully some of you have read with a cab driver from New York City, Frederick Amapo. I know New York is unique in a lot of respects. He's very concerned about his medallion. He's very concerned about the investment that he put in. He's very concerned about his livelihood. My question is, what do you say, I'll pose this to you again, what do you say to a driver like that? Does government have a role? Should it be looking to protect drivers like that?
No, I don't think the government does have a role in protecting the value of an individual taxi driver's medallion. That's the product of a 19th century perspective on regulation that you don't have a constitutional right to protect in a 21st century world. Your medallion is an agreement between you and the city that you have the right to provide taxi cab service, and no one's taking that away from you by there being competing services. It's, again, an anti-consumer regulation. If what we're attempting to accomplish with our taxi cab regulations is protecting the value of individual companies or the value of individual drivers' medallions, granted, the city may have a constitutional and a good policy interest in trying to incentivize taxi cab service generally. But that doesn't mean that individual drivers who are lucky enough to hold medallions or individual companies that are lucky enough to hold permits in non-medallion cities deserve the power of government as a means of protection. I point to the Boston Globe's recent story on the dangers of the medallion system, where individual drivers are telling their stories of, I think we're all in this room familiar with it, if we're being honest, of large companies coming in and buying up medallions and pricing them out of the market for those medallions and making it impossible for them to make a good living. Medallions are they're a big point of concern for us to the extent that taxi drivers think that they have a constitutional right to prevent cities from changing their laws in a pro-consumer way.
Wouldn't a city like New York that has sold these medallions under certain terms and expectations, would they be in breach, in essence, of a and said, okay, now stop, everybody can be a cab driver?
Well, you had to say in essence of a contract, right? A medallion is not a contract, and it's not a guarantee that you can keep competition out if the city decides that it wants to innovate. The city is there to regulate the benefit of the people that live in the city, not to perpetuate a given system, medallion system or otherwise, that a limited number of people enjoy.
Richard, that's a financial question if you had to comment on that.
Well, we've been financing medallions in a number of cities. New York is our largest, and New York has done a good job defending its regulatory framework in the wake of these transportation network companies' proliferation. But the truth is that property owner right is a specific right by regulation. It is not from the 19th century. It's the Haas Act of 1937 was passed in New York because the taxi industry was under great disarray. There were people fighting in the streets for fares, and the city decided that this is an important part of our transportation system, so perhaps we should bring it under some of our control and our auspices. And over decades of progressive and quite prudent regulation, the asset became more valuable, not necessarily because they were defending that right. It became more valuable because of the income it can generate for the driver. And I think that to characterize the medallion system as defective is sort of, in my opinion, not looking at all the positive things that have come from it, specifically in New York City and other cities. And if you think about the medallion system, it's, again, as I say, part of the transportation fabric of the city. And so many positive initiatives have come with taxi cabs as a participant in that. And I could go through a number of them, but we talk about consumer safety, which is critical when you're talking about transporting people from one place to another. The TNCs don't do that. They're actually a regressive model, not a progressive model. They only serve a limited amount of the population, and they don't have to pick up, they don't have to have accessibility requirements, and they don't have to have a myriad of requirements for vehicle quality, vehicles, vehicle safety, and a number of other things. So they're really taking it back a couple of decades in terms of the regulatory oversight of that particular segment of transportation. So the truth is, it's not progressive, and I do think that you have, if you've sold something to somebody, like the city of New York has auctioned off medallions, and the premise is that you have this given property right, I think you do have to defend that property right.
Thank you. I'd like to add a little non-New York perspective to this issue. Matt got my biography almost right. I am not the owner of Yellow Cab Los Angeles. I'm the general manager of Yellow Cab Los Angeles, and 4 other taxi fleets. The 5 fleets that I manage are cooperatives, and among the 1,250 cars that we manage across those 5 cooperatives, there's about 800 owners. These are individuals who are almost entirely first-generation immigrants. They started off driving a cab by leasing it. They eventually went on to use the cab industry to buy their first taxi cab, sometimes to buy their second, sometimes to buy their third through their own hard work, and actually through working through their own ethnic communities, getting help from their ethnic communities. Right now what's going on is that we have players who have entered this, they've entered into our arena, providing on-demand, point-to-point, intra-city ground transportation, doing exactly what we do at a fraction of the cost, backed by their billions of Wall Street dollars. As a result, my owners have now lost about 2/3 of their value. This is actually 2/3 of their family's wealth and their assets are evaporating. And in essence, what is a wealth transfer into this into Uber and these Goldman Sachs-backed companies, and what's enabling it is a 2-tier regulatory structure that allows one company to basically flout the law, do whatever they want, whenever they want in terms of pricing, access to drivers, access to vehicles, and everything else, and then we are stuck in a regulatory structure that is created to benefit the public, but has created this competitive disadvantage. So the real impacts on this group of people I'm seeing every day, and it's totally wrong from a public policy perspective.
If I could add one more thing to Bill's comment, in New York City, over 50% of the medallions are owned by individuals or small businesses. These are not the large fleet owners. And those, you can purchase a medallion on the open market, notwithstanding its value, and they're done through regulated parties. So the TLC has to approve who can sell these medallions to these individuals because they want to make sure the transactions are legitimate and they're transparent. You can see what they're trading for at any given time on the TLC's website. But Bill makes a very good point. There's a lot of these folks that have invested their life savings in this particular asset. And that privilege comes with a lot of requirements. You have to pick everybody up. You have to have vehicles that meet certain standards. You have to do a lot of things to have that property right. So it's not just a matter of asset value. It's a matter of what that taxi does as a public servant in the transportation system.
Yeah, what do you say to that? That, you know, with the deregulation, it keeps going, the service will deteriorate, that certain areas won't necessarily get service.
So I just wanted to point out really fast that there are different models. We're not really the same as Uber and Lyft. There are different TNC models, so we're sort of actually in a different category because all our rides are scheduled in advance, usually weeks in advance, and it's flat rates. So there's no such thing as surge pricing. Everybody knows what it's going to be long in advance. And yet, because there's no bucket in which to put us, we end up as a TNC, and that's what we have as a license in California. The commonality between us is that these are regular people using their personal vehicles. So to answer your question, how do you ensure coverage in every area, bad neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, rich neighborhoods, whatever? Well, the model of using regular drivers to be able to pick up people easily and figure out who needs rides and make money from it actually helps in that matter because we allow anybody to sign up as long as they're not criminals and they have good cars. So basically, and they have good driving records. So essentially that means that people who are in the poor neighborhoods will now be drivers and will have, of course, no problem picking up their own neighbors. So it ensures actually coverage. And the sheer fact that there's no limit on the number of drivers also ensures coverage. If you have 100 drivers and you have 50,000 inhabitants in the city, obviously that creates a conflict in terms of cherry picking which rides you're going to do since you can't meet all the demand. So that's how I see it.
If I could just follow up a bit on the point of medallions. Customers aren't a property right that you have, that you can go to court and guarantee in the future. If you've made an investment in a medallion, you've extracted the value of that by operating. You get to continue to extract the value of that by operating. And this has been challenged in court, the diminution of the value of the medallion. In Minneapolis, for example, the taxi owners lost. And they lost because you don't have a constitutional right to keep your competition out of the market. That's not recognized by the courts. And you know, the Institute for Justice has, in the Minneapolis case, in a case that's going on in Milwaukee right now, intervened on behalf of small-time entrepreneur drivers who have wanted to break into the taxi cab system but can't because of the cap on permits or because of these exclusive medallions. And you know, we're going to continue to do that because our perspective is that you ensure service to low-income areas, not with the current regulations that say that taxi cabs have to go to those areas because, let's be honest, they don't work and they're not enforced effectively. You ensure service to low-income areas by putting more cabs on the road. And you know, I think Minneapolis is a good model for that. In the years since the court struck down that law, you've seen an influx of predominantly immigrant taxi cab drivers. And they're working alongside the ride-sharing companies now there too, where the city has reasonably permissive ride-sharing policies. So I think the two can coexist, and I think you can ensure that traditionally underserved areas are better served. We've been trying this idea of requiring taxi cabs with an exclusive privilege, of requiring them to go there. We've been trying that for a century, and it still doesn't work.
Can I answer that?
all our cabs for probably 10, 15 years have been geolocated. So we've got data on where our cabs are. We've got data going back. We're obliged to keep it for 7 years of who tried to book a cab, when that cab turned up, and where they went to. Okay? And that data is by law required to be provided to the regulators. And so the regulators can have access to the information. They can work out what areas are being under-serviced. They can also use that work to plan out where they're going to put their scheduled services, so when they're going to put buses in, when they're going to build heavy and light rail to service expanding cities. That information comes out of a regulated taxi industry and has a public good. Now, quite frankly, in the case of this debate, sometimes we get misled to be thinking that the taxi industry is saying, please protect us regulators because some way we deserve it. Sometimes we hear from the rideshare companies or the TNCs, hey look, free us up, all we want to do is compete, take away the regulations. Regulations exist there for the public good. Medallions were put in place in my country, in New York, Chicago and other jurisdictions, but the permit system works similarly for the public good. Now, there are no free lunches here. If, as a society, as a community, the community decides that they want accessible taxi services, they want services 24/7, if they want to be able to pre-book services, if whatever the community wants, they then put that in as a requirement on the taxi service. Now, some of those things are easy for us to do, others have a cost. It's called regulatory burden. Okay? It's called red tape and other circumstances. Okay? The taxi industry, because we're private sector, because we are actually innovative and entrepreneurial, we find ways of delivering those services within price caps. Because one of the criteria that's always there on the taxi service is that we are a service of last resort for the poor, for the disabled, for the elderly. Because we provide the door-to-door service. And so we need to remain affordable. So typically it's in the community's interest to have a price cap on our services. And therefore they put a cap on the supply of services as well, because they define the market. And medallions find their own price within that frame. In New York, they're over $1 million. I can show you medallions that sell for $1 in my country, and some that sell for $500,000. They find their own level. They're not a protection of people. They're not something that governments create to give to people. In fact, governments sell them, and they are actually not an asset of the industry. In fact, they are an asset of the community. And governments shouldn't give them away. They should sell them so that they don't waste that asset.
I just want to ask one quick question about that. You can look at the taxi industry as an extension of the transit system, linking or substituting subways and buses where they don't go. And government traditionally, controls and sets the fares and sets the rates either through a government agency or a public authority. And there are policy reasons for that. Why shouldn't that apply to taxis industry as well as the transit? What's the reasoning for abandoning a model of government setting caps or prices or rates?
In the taxi industry specifically? Well, we've never challenged price setting in the taxi industry. I think that if we got rid of price setting in the taxi industry, good things might flow from it, but I'm not taking a position on that one way or the other. It's just my hunch based on more of a free market perspective. In the limousine and sedan industry, they're exceedingly rare. The minimum fares that we're told are so essential in some of these cases exist right now in 13 cities in the country. And if you look at the top 100 cities in terms of population, there are only 8 of them that have minimum fares. The large ones, New York, Chicago, LA, now Houston, which just last month got rid of its $70 minimum fare for limousines and sedans. Those Those cities don't have these regulations, and somehow they support the nation's most vibrant taxi cab industries. And, you know, I think that we need to recognize that they're relatively new innovations, that they are anti-consumer insofar as if someone only wants to use sedan service or only wants to partner with a properly regulated TNC that's subject to these minimum fares, they're being forced to pay a non-market rate. The gentlemen on the other side are taking the position that, you know, assets find their own value in the marketplace. Well, that needs to be true for consumers too.
Government, you know, passes a lot of laws and a lot of restrictions to protect consumers. I don't see why should this be different? I mean, you know, the government regulates how certain foods can be, you know, produced and stored. And this government regulation, isn't this just another area where there should be, that the government needs to make sure that things are done with regulation, you know, safely and hopefully efficiently?
Well, yes, but if you're talking about minimum fares specifically, then no, because I don't agree that it's a consumer protection measure. It's an industry protection measure.
Well, what about, you know, licensing and having strict requirements of, you know, that you have to have a certain amount of training, you have to have a certain amount of insurance. I mean, do you disagree with that? What's your opinion on that?
Well, from a constitutional perspective, it's unimpeachable, right? Because you're talking about doing something that is not there to protect the taxi cab industry or any other transportation industry that may be out there in the marketplace. It's there to protect consumers from injury. Injury that the government has evidence is a real danger to people. But there's not any evidence to support these minimum fares, and that's why they're different.
We'll talk about insurance quickly.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. First of all, it's very interesting to say when we talk about regulation is what they do with fares in Europe, they're actually setting the maximum fare you can charge, not the minimum. So when you talk about surge pricing at the whim of a transportation network company's decision, that is more of an issue to me than maximum fare set by regulatory limits, because it protects the public from getting ripped off, quite honestly. Just ask people that try to get around the Superstorm Sandy, what happened to them. But we're talking about companies that their business model is it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So I don't know what the Constitution says about breaking rules and regulations without being able to do that. I don't know what it says about that, but I don't think that we should be giving validity to people who just do what they want and hope that it works out later. Now, I don't know if that's the benefit to consumers, and I'm pretty sure that on a whole, when you talk about transportation network companies, there's a lot of sizzle, not a lot of steak, because they're not doing a lot of the things that both Blair and Bill have eloquently spoke about protecting consumers' rights. And just because the medallion has an asset value, because of the cash flow it can generate, the income it can generate for the driver, again, I want to reiterate, a lot of responsibility comes with that privilege, and I'm not sure the transportation network companies are big on responsibility.
Two areas very quickly. First of all, service to hard-to-serve areas. The TNCs would have you believe that this is actually something that's solved completely by the market on its own, and in fact, the opposite is true. Success in serving hard-to-serve areas is actually more tied to strong, thoughtful regulations than it is to deregulation. Let me give you another example out of Los Angeles. The City of Los Angeles receives 100% of our dispatch data, including GPS. The city goes through an evaluation process, including looking at how well a company is servicing hard-to-serve areas. Once that's done, then the city will incent the poor-performing companies to pick up their performance. So in that way, the regulation is there absolutely to benefit the community as a whole, in particular areas that may not receive adequate service on their own. And so what ends up happening in terms of corrective behaviors within the companies, they put subsidy programs together and build the business there to keep drivers there serving those communities. That wouldn't happen in deregulation, and it will not happen with the TNCs. The other thing is in terms of deregulation of pricing, there is absolutely plenty of examples of deregulation of pricing in this market, and there is not one success story. The reason is that that the consumer has no ability to evaluate the next vehicle coming down the street to know whether it's the $5 a mile or the $2 a mile or the $3 a mile vehicle. And so deregulation of pricing has been a failure every single place it's been tried. And that is as to the consumer, because the driver who just jacks up their fare, there's no accountability for that. So those are actually measures that are there to protect the consumer. There's no argument that they're there to protect the cab company.
I think it might be a good idea now, if anyone has a question from the audience, I could just stand up and ask it, and I'll repeat it.
When I think about for-hire transportation, we break the first rule that our parents teach us, never to get in the car with strangers. So in the back of our mind, when we get into a taxi cab or for-hire vehicle, we're under the impression that someone has done due diligence to ensure our protection. When I heard the gentleman speak about who he gets his background checks through, when the city of New Orleans hosted the Super Bowl, we compromised and used that same company he's speaking about. And we did that because there was an influx of drivers coming in to provide transportation. I can tell you firsthand that two of those drivers that background check company approved, we had to revoke those drivers' permits because of extensive criminal background history. We talk about individuals that served at least 10 years in prison for some violent crimes, and this company he's speaking about approved them. So when we think about those things, the question that I would have for the individuals up front is, what are you doing to ensure the protection of the public? And when I'm thinking about the public, I'm thinking about my family, I'm thinking about my friends, and I'm thinking about my grandmother. Now, it's one thing for me to take a risk. When I'm driving a vehicle, I might exceed the speed limit when I'm by myself. But when my family's in the car, I make sure that I abide by the law. I don't take those risks that I would normally take by myself. And then the second thing, we talk about consumer protections. I think it was the gentleman on the end who talks about consumer protections, making sure that the consumer has choice. Well, the consumer technically does not have choice, because we limit the amount of vehicles that can be out of service. And the companies limit which vehicles can be out of service. So if you're limiting the amount of vehicles that can be out of service that are for-hire vehicles, but you don't have a cap on the maximum price that an individual can charge, how are you protecting the consumers? And I'll leave you with this. For the LSU Wisconsin game, which was held in Houston, there was a vehicle which took a 10-mile trip. The trip lasted 15 minutes, and it was a $260 fare. That fare normally would have been $39. Now, you're telling me that that's consumer protection? It doesn't sound like consumer protection. It sounds like consumer exploitation.
I think we're missing each other, because even the gentleman on the other side, I think are missing my point. I'm talking about minimum fares. I'm talking about the regulation in New Orleans that says you have to pay $120 minimum for a limo, or $105 minimum for a sedan. Or in Atlanta, we have to pay $25 minimum for either of those services. Or in Portland, Oregon, where it's tied specifically to the price of a taxi cab company. I'm not talking about maximum fares. Those regulations are different from a constitutional perspective, and I think there are arguments that are stronger for maximum fares, that they're consumer protection measures. I'm speaking specifically to minimum fares, which make the consumer in all circumstances, even if you're going a block, pay $105 for a sedan ride in New Orleans. That's not a consumer protection measure. And as for background checks, as I've said, I think 3 times now, they're a good thing, and they should be done properly. Probably by the government. But that's something that y'all as regulators, can make happen by changing the laws in the jurisdictions that you're in. If they apply equally to taxi cabs and TNCs, there's absolutely no constitutional objection to it, and it seems like good policy to me. For the same reason that you're describing. I mean, my wife rides around in Lyft all the time. And I don't have a problem with it, because we've never had a problem with it. But any time there's a story about something bad happening, it's concerning. But you take the same risk when you get into a taxi cab, unless we're doing the same background checks on any for-hire driver.
Did you want to comment on his concerns on the safety, or just move on?
No, I basically agree that regulation is good for the safety, and that's why we do background checks on The other thing to remember is some sites, like Craigslist, that has a big rideshare section, go to it, you'll see in some cities thousands of requests out there. They have no insurance requirement, they have no background check requirement, they have no vehicle inspection requirement. So the good side is what has happened in California is California said to certain websites, defined as T&Cs, you guys have to do all this. So they put in regulations, so we are regulated, and we are conforming to regulations. So it's there's some discrepancy out there still about how this is handled, but we are definitely being regulated and we are complying.
Just addressing that area of risk. I grew up in an age where smoking was tolerated. In fact, if you were a non-smoker, you had to passive smoke because smoking was just all around. Similarly, drinking with driving was seen as something that got penalised, but it wasn't seen as something that actually kills people. Move on a generation, and in fact, we've now got an appropriate view of cigarette smoking. If you want to kill yourself, but don't kill others in the process. If you want to drink, don't drive, don't kill other people. Now that's advocating for consumers. A generation ago, 2 generations ago, people didn't understand the risk. And then people started dying, and we ended up with the costs to our hospital systems and medical systems associated with treating those people. And we all worked out that it wasn't worth the risk. The freedom wasn't a freedom because it came at a cost. It wasn't monetarised 2 generations ago, but when you start to monetarise it, you work out that nobody wants to pay the price, and they certainly don't want to pay for their own health. And what we're talking about here is an experience curve that the taxi industry is well up. We know that there are undesirable people that are attracted to driving vulnerable people and people who are strangers to them, people alone, in circumstances where it's dark, it's late at night. And we have, as an industry, working with our regulators, put in place as high a high jump bar as we possibly can to keep those people out of the industry. And yet, on occasions, we still find that some people get through the system and perpetrate crime. Safety is not an issue where you drop the bar. Safety is something that you keep on increasing the bar. And as technology has allowed us to access wider and wider databases, use technologies like fingerprinting to make that easy, then we should be embracing that technology. We shouldn't be dropping down. We shouldn't be dropping to a lower standard. And the idea that there's been a few lift rides or even 1,000 lift rides and some folk haven't had an experience that's bad for them, well, quite frankly, this isn't about creating a system where 99% of the times it works well. This is about trying to create a system where people can reliably, on 100% of occasions, have confidence that it's the safest that it can be made. It's not perfectly safe, but it's as safe as it possibly can be made. The fact that people don't see the risk doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The taxi industry knows there's a risk there. I think regulators who've been around for long enough would well and truly know the risks that are there. And lots of the regulations that seem perplexing to people that take a casual view of this industry have been put in place to address specific issues where harm has happened and the regulation has been put in place to avoid the harm. That's the proper role of regulation. Regulation, good regulation occurs when it's appropriate. When, if you didn't have a regulation stopping it, something bad would happen that you don't want to happen. It's got to be effective. The regulation has to try and solve that, and then it's got to be efficient. It's got to do it in the least cost way. Regulation is neither good nor bad of itself. It's what it produces. Yeah?
I mean, I'm sorry this isn't much of a debate because we agree with you guys on that.
Right. That's fine too. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I actually do have a question, but I just want to introduce myself. My name is Placida Robinson, and I'm a medallion owner in 2 states now, but especially in New York. And so I just wanted to introduce myself as one of those people whose wealth transfer has been transferred ostensibly to the tech companies. Um, and it's because owners are scared to pay for the right to provide the public service that they initially desired to engage in by the actions of the permitted lawlessness of the TLC, the TMCs. I subscribe to medallion ownership because of the legitimacy and the promised sustainability of a regulated and a well-regulated public service. And I also hold a degree in public policy, and so I believe in public service. And that is what I subscribe to when I purchased my medallion. In my case, the public service that I subscribed to was the exclusive right to street hail. And I don't think that that's a debate here with the TNCs. We are not trying to street hail, but again, I paid for an exclusive right to do something publicly. And I bear an extremely heavy burden that I wish the TNCs would acknowledge, would participate in, because my burden is to fulfill rate transparency. I'm subject to surcharges, even the MTA, when it needs to raise revenue. They come to us as regulated medallion owners to do that. You're not subject to that. I'm subject to inspections and a whole host of other things and a high cost of overhead that you guys are just simply not engaging in and helping to support the public by doing. But my question is, have you assessed your vulnerability to nefarious purposes like terrorism or drug smuggling, the use of your vehicles and the use of your service for such black market or illicit activities? Have you assessed that? Because I know that as medallion owners, we're heavily screened, especially with respect to prostitution in New York. We have to take courses to make sure that we're confirming that we're not transporting women. Could you just talk about what can go on in the gray areas with the TNC that you're not being held accountable for? And thank you so much.
So WINS is scheduled rides. So the people requiring a ride will make a request for weeks. They'll give a date and a time in advance. So it's different. It's not an on-demand service. It's very different from hailing. It's not even e-hailing, let alone hailing. So what happens is people have profiles and they create a profile on the website typically. And so we have a lot of information about both the riders and the drivers. And the riders get a picture, contact information, and they basically are able to speak with each other. We know they have a credit card which they enter. So they're traced, also IP address. So there's a lot of ways to identify who these folks are. So from that perspective, it's safer than picking up somebody in the street. But then again, we're not hailing and we're not on-demand instantaneous rides, so we're not really compared. We don't compare to Uber and Lyft in that sense.
I just want to jump quickly to insurance. That's the big topic discussed here. There's some references to it earlier. Could you explain, either for your company or what's going on in California, what are the insurance, for your company, what is the insurance requirement and why, who is covered? The passengers covered, is the driver covered, and why you think it's adequate if you do?
The requirement by the California Public Utilities Commission is $1 million per incident liability insurance. So that is the amount per incident that we are required to have commercial auto insurance for. And the legislation in California also just seconded that with a law that was signed last week by Governor Brown TNC in California. So basically, the current status is the drivers, the personal owners of the vehicles have their personal insurance, and then we have primary insurance. We're going to be required with the new law to have primary insurance in case of an incident, up to $1 million. So that covers passenger, driver, and any other liability occurring from an accident.
But the driver's policies, is your system that the driver's policy is the first policy that is on the hook, so to speak? Or
Yes.
It is.
The new California law requires it to be primary. There's an alternative that California has put in the legislation for insurance companies to provide a rider option for consumers to be able to add an option on their personal policies to be able to do rides, paid rides. So being able to accept paid rides as part of their personal policy. So California law has said once that exists, once insurance companies start introducing that product, then if the TNCs require any driver or if the driver has that, then they'll be also eligible.
But I think that the insurance industry has raised objections or says that, they're not going to cover the drivers. When they wrote when I got my car policy, it wasn't part of the policy that I would be driving around commercially, that I would be taking a suggested donation or however you want to call it. It's basically, in their eyes, it's commercial. So it seems like there is a gap, and it seems like that the consumers could be in need of some protection there.
Correct. And that's what California did, because this kind of policy, personal policy that covers both paid rides and personal use, doesn't exist yet. They basically filled the gap by having the TNCs who are permitted present to them their insurance policies. They review these insurance policies and their commercial auto policies for all for any incident. So this policy is in lieu of the personal policy carried by the driver. So by doing this, California has basically filled the gap to avoid any kind of risk. It's not an ideal situation because you still have several policies. Some of these drivers, many of these drivers are driving on multiple platforms. They may be signed up on Uber, Lyft, and others, maybe four apps. So it's not a perfect solution because now you have a situation where you have an accident. You potentially have maybe 5 policies that could be claimed. 4 apps plus 1 policy, 1 personal. And nobody really knows for sure who should cover it. So it's not a perfect solution. But what California's done is try to fill all the holes by forcing all these TNCs to have this type of insurance. My prediction is in the future, because of this melding of personal use and commercial use, insurance companies are going to come up with a rider, an option basically, where you say, Mr. Smith, you can add for $2,000 a year the option to do ride sharing. How many rides do you give a year? 100? Under 100? You give more than 500? Okay, it'll be $2,000. It'll be maybe $3,000, $4,000, depending on how often they're doing it. And that's probably where this is going, because ultimately, you just want one policy. When somebody has an accident, the responsible party is always the driver. So at the end of the day, you want one policy to be clear. You don't want to have lawsuits for every accident. So that may happen in the California legislation predicts that by saying if new policies come out that meet this, that fit this definition, then that will be fine.
Yeah, Bill, I'd like to comment on that. Is that your understanding that gaps pretty much or to some extent are filled in California?
No. You'll be surprised to hear my opinion on that one. No, let me walk you through the way we saw the bill as it was going through. And there's one telling fact here. AB 2293 was originally sponsored by both the Personal Insurance Federation of California and the Consumer Attorneys of California. By the time the bill got through the Senate, the consumer attorneys were off the bill, and Uber and Lyft were on the bill. So that should point out to you that there's something fishy with the bill. The other thing to point out here is that overall, the campaign that Uber ran against the bill was entitled Save Ride Sharing, which led me to conclude that this industry apparently wants the public to believe that it is not financially viable if it doesn't have 100% full-time insurance on the vehicles. But in more detail, the bill breaks down 3 different time periods. Ultimately, the second 2 time periods were merged. The first time period is the period while the driver is in the dispatch process. This is the time when the driver is actually driving down the road, distracted, watching his cell phone instead of watching the road. This is the time period that poor little Sophia Lou, the 6-year-old, was killed in the crosswalk. It is in this time period that actually the bill requires less insurance than Jeff was talking about. And so the period that is the most dangerous, the period that presents the most exposure, is the period that actually gets the least amount of insurance. The second thing the bill doesn't address is it doesn't address offline trips. These drivers are entrepreneurial, and many of these drivers are former taxi drivers. They have their personals. They are going to want to they're going to have every incentive in the world not to share the 20-25%, now it's 25% in San Francisco with Uber, so they're going to bring their personal passengers in offline trips. There is 0 insurance coverage for the driver, for the passenger, and for any member of the public who is injured during the course of that trip. The next hole in the coverage, it has to do with post drop-off. There was a speaker who mentioned earlier about if you're driving out of a hotel after a drop-off. The example that we give is right after a drop-off at an airport. No carrier is going to concede that the vehicle is now engaged in a personal use the moment after a passenger gets out of the car after a drop-off at the airport. Why were you at the airport? Oh, I transferred this passenger for compensation. The vehicle is there because of a commercial use. And that bill and the insurance provisions contained in it do not protect the public for that. So what we have is a bill that is going to guarantee coverage battles. What do coverage battles mean? It means that the parties who have small injuries are just not going to get compensated at all because lawyers will not find it in their financial interest to pursue those claims. So if you have a minor injury, you're just not getting covered. If you have a major injury, the costs of defense are going to go up because every little bit about the case, from liability to whose responsibility is going to be, to who's responsible is going to be litigated. And so that is going to drive up costs. There was one thing stated earlier that was actually incorrect. When the app companies are not paying their proper premiums, it is not the insurance companies that get left holding the bag. It is the ratepayers in general. What happens in the insurance industry is a cross-subsidy. So we in this room, as ratepayers, we are now subsidizing the business of Uber and its $18 billion valuation. This insurance bill was flawed from the beginning. We in the taxi industry, we were simply overwhelmed. Our $15,000 of lobbying compared to their $400,000 worth of lobbying, and we were just simply overwhelmed. And so, unfortunately, it's a bad bill, and it is now law.
Two gentlemen get their questions in.
Jason was first, so I'll yield to him, then come to me, please.
I appreciate that, Tom. Thanks. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Michelle. I'm a former Commissioner and General Counsel of the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. I've already made presentations, a couple of them this week, regarding accessibility. It's something we have not talked about yet today in regards to the TNCs, and I'd like to address that topic. It's becoming very important. It's cropped up in a number of lawsuits around the country regarding TNCs, or certain TNCs not providing accessibility. When I spoke on Monday, I mentioned that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not mandate a fully accessible taxi fleet or a required number of vehicles. However, it does mandate that passengers cannot be discriminated against and that equivalent service must be provided. So I'd like to know what the TNCs are doing as far as providing this equivalent service, and if the answer is that they are simply referring customers to car services that have accessible vehicles because they are not providing vehicles themselves, I'd like to hear a little justification regarding that as a proper accommodation for the passengers.
Regarding accessibility, the thing about us is we're a website arranging rides between riders and drivers who are not part of our organization. And these are personal vehicles, so it does present somewhat of a challenge because a lot of drivers don't have accessible vehicles. So what we thought would be useful would be to incent people with those types of vehicles to sign up as drivers by basically not being paid any commission at all, and keep 100% of the money paid by the rider. And other solutions would be also to encourage commercial services with those types of vehicles to sign up as drivers to be the only non-personal drivers on the platform, so have an exception. Because right now the rule in California, we can't have commercial vehicles, it has to be personal vehicles drivers signing up on our platform. So we'd have to make an exception in the regulations saying you can add accessible vehicles so you can accommodate those types of requests. Those would be ideas that I put out there, but we want to encourage that service any way we can.
Yeah, look, this is a significant point of difference, isn't it? As a community, all around America, all around the globe, we recognise that we need to provide mobility for people with disability. Typically, that falls on the taxi service. And so we have wheelchair accessible taxis. In my country, 10% of the fleet is wheelchair accessible. It comes at a very significant cost. Many of those vehicles don't operate profitably, some do. We've been looking at ways of how we can make them more and more viable. And picking up on Jeff's point, it is really tough. But we have to pony up and deliver a wheelchair accessible service. The TNCs are skirting around the issue. They're avoiding a responsibility. Okay? They're evading it. This is one of the reasons why you need strong regulation, because there'll be a market failure that you don't want. Right? This is why we have a regulated taxi industry. This is why there are imposts on the industry. And this is why you need systems like medallions and permits. Okay, there's a cost, but there's a benefit. You end up with a wheelchair accessible taxi service that can deliver people from door to door, and you make them mobile. New York's doing some great things. It's doing them on the back of a medallion-based system and a regulated system, and it can actually achieve great outcomes for that community. Any community that decides to head down this free market TNC approach where they lose the power to regulate good outcomes, well, the people that will lose out of that are wheelchair accessible customers. And if you just look at the reports out of San Francisco recently, demand is down for regular taxi services, but it's down even further, or rather service to people with wheelchairs is halved in terms of demand.
So the issue of providing accessible taxi cab service is a function of two things: money and will. We already know that the TNCs have plenty of money, but the problem is that they have no will to solve this problem. And this is yet another example of why the two-tiered regulatory structure is disadvantaging the taxi cab industry. Because in my company, among our 1,200 cabs, we distribute more than $400,000 a year in cross subsidies collected from our members in order to incentivize owners to buy wheelchair vans, in order to help defray the extra cost of maintaining those wheelchair vans, and then to provide a bonus for each and every wheelchair trip provided by the driver. Because otherwise nobody voluntarily would ever sign up for that service. And so if we operated under the TNC's rules, then I could wipe $400,000 in dues off our annual budget like that if I didn't have to provide this service. But we do. It's a product of good regulation about providing service to the public, about providing meaningful service that actually makes a major difference in the lives of our users, but it has to be subsidized, and there has to be a will to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tom Hicks. I'm with Monterey Salinas Transit District, Monterey, California. Have no vested interest in the taxi industry, but we use the taxis quite a bit. We depend on taxis to pick up someone at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to get their dialysis trip, wheelchair or no wheelchair. There's many other circumstances, including the elderly, that we need to incentivize our taxi industry to leave the airport queues and the hotel queues to go up and pick somebody elderly up, to take them 1 mile to the pharmacy. We have to underwrite that because it's a very important service. So I think it's very simplistic to say that people such as our agency, we also regulate taxis in our county, to say that we're trying to protect the taxi industry, because you just can't separate the two. You don't have a healthy taxi industry if you have drivers leaving, painting their cabs, and joining largely unregulated services that aren't required to operate 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That hurts the public, especially those that are most disadvantaged. So my question to you, on the right side of the panel, are you willing to pay a surtax on every ride to go into a fund that would subsidize transportation for disadvantaged populations that are currently served by a well-regulated, healthy taxi industry?
Well, first I want to make clear that I work for a nonprofit law firm that represents small companies that don't work for a TNC. So to the extent that questions are being directed to me as a TNC, I'm not one. But I think Seattle's recent regulations are a model in many respects. This is one of them. They do have a surcharge that they put on every single, Seattle's regular, by the way, every single ride-sharing trip that goes to fund the city purchasing accessible services, either through the taxi cab companies or through the public transit authority. And there's certainly no, I mean, I suppose there is a free market objection to that, but there's certainly no constitutional problem with it. It seems like it's addressing the market failure that y'all are concerned about in a fair way.
I agree. It's okay.
Can I make a point? People with disability don't want to see themselves stigmatized. What they're looking for is the ability to be able to enjoy their life with their disability with the minimum inconvenience. They want, if a regular person, if a person without disability can catch a taxi, that's what they want to do. And quite frankly, that's a great social outcome. When they can actually, when we can help them minimise the inconvenience of their disability. Putting them in a white van, putting them in some stigmatised alternate transportation system isn't an appropriate solution for their need. Second thing is, the economics of it doesn't work. If you go and have a look at any of the states associated with those special systems, they don't deliver services on a per kilometre basis, dollar per kilometre basis, anything like you can get through a taxi service. You may as well use the taxi service because it delivers the social outcome that you want and it delivers it the most efficient way.
Well, first of all, my name is Robbie Worth. I'm the current president of the TLPA, and I was in the debate on the wheelchair service in Seattle on radio, and it amazes me that the solution that anybody would think that the solution they would have come up with is at all a solution that does nothing to discriminate against persons with disabilities. To fund a service and not make that service accessible in and of itself is, I think, a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, having said that, we're currently going under the same issues in Virginia right now and studying this, and a lot of people are pointing to California. And there are a couple of issues, one of which hasn't been really addressed yet, is the loss of revenue by the localities when a contract passenger carrier, a sedan carrier who is licensed and is paying taxes, moves over to a TNC, and all of a sudden no taxes are being paid as far as local property tax, because there's no brick and mortar, as far as local gross receipts or business license tax, because the payments go through a phone and then go someplace else, we're not quite sure. And as far as permitting fees, and there's several other fees that have to be paid. None of those are being paid. And I would just like you to comments on what the group thinks about is either fair or equitable, or do you think it should continue that the TNC should not have to pay the local and state taxes?
We pay fees to the California Public Utilities Commission, and we pay ongoing fees on our revenue to the California Public Utilities Commission. It's basically similar to limousine companies. It's the same regulatory body who regulates us. So we are compliant with these fees, and pay as a corporation, we pay all the appropriate stated income tax, state and federal income taxes as well, and payroll taxes. So from our perspective, we are paying fees. So we're compliant with what we've been regulated to do.
I guess at this point, we'll take one more question, and then we'll let everybody else get out about New Orleans or where they have to go.
Well, thank you for allowing the last question. My name is Tarek Malik. I'm the general manager of the 7 car limousine service in New York City. Approximately 1,000 vehicles, owner-operator environment. I'm also the co-founder of Delivery Roundtable. I came to this country about 1976, and I got bewildered with some words. One of them is bad, meaning good, and it seems to be going very consistent with destructive being good. I understand the meaning, but I don't understand how we can get by with doing the minimum we can get away with, not the maximum, and the best we can do for our respective industry and ridership. When I heard the gentleman from Wings kind of tell us that he does everything correctly, as indicated, I don't fault him. I fault our regulators for allowing once a quarter, once every 3 months, to see if that driver is still valid or not. In New York City, we're required to do this every single day. I don't get it. I don't get how we are still being tied down, and we do it willingly, so there's a contradiction or a set. Every day we follow a whole scheme of making sure our drivers are safe, our ridership is safe every single day, and that's not required from anybody else. The other one point that I wanted to bring across before we all go to Barbadians and coffee is when you say that you're going to be the primary insurer, are you accepting the primary responsibility? And how? I don't understand. Thank you. Let me apologize. First, thank you for taking the questions, and shame on the people who did not sit out there and take the questions.
In terms of the insurance, we have insurance that covers us for trips that were arranged through our site. From the moment that the driver starts going towards the person that he has scheduled to pick up, to the time after he drops off. And so that, from that time on, our insurance considered us to be liable, and that's what the insurance we purchased is covering us for. And regarding the regulation, we are regulated, and we agree. We will abide by the regulations. A fair playing field for all is a good thing.
If I could just address the first part of this question. I mean, I think disruptive is good in this sense. We're going through a change demographically in this country with a lot of young people moving into the urban centers and a lot of people wanting to live without cars and to move around their cities effectively. And a lot of cities don't have effective public transit systems. That's why this is happening. It's happening because, to use a term that was directed at us a few moments ago, because there's a market failure here in the sense that people don't have access to the cabs they need. And you can go just about anywhere in this country and people will complain about their cab service. I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with that from their own cities. And I think that's why, I'm pretty convinced that's why, we are struggling right now with how to integrate new services, new models that can fill those gaps. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's very difficult. And we can point fingers at each other about how it's being done, but it has to be done. And we have to sort these issues out. And the result, I'm hoping, is that consumers have readier access, all consumers have readier access to transportation options that they could pick on their terms.
I'm going to speak very loud.
You can have this mic.
It's
very quickly, because we have one last.
again, back from being an immigrant. I come to this country with the basic understanding is rules are to be followed or changed. I don't understand, let's break the rules and then try for loopholes and then go back and try to change and moderate. I don't come and hit you and then let's go saying, oh, well, the law is not really good. Let's resolve the law. First, I don't break the law. I will invest. I find out. Lobby. Do whatever you want. Make new laws and follow them, but don't break them and then pretend it's okay.
Let's just take the last speaker here. You can identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Emily Pastor. I'm the Director of Community Relations at Lyft. And I want to thank Matt for inviting me to attend this conference. I've enjoyed the opportunities that I've had to speak with quite a few of you over the last 3 days that I've been here. And hearing the speakers who've been chosen here at the IATR. Many of the individuals that you've heard from have strong personal opinions on our industry, and I really appreciate Matt giving me the opportunity to provide an alternative perspective, and I appreciate the representatives who are speaking on behalf of that perspective as well, even though our CEO wasn't able to attend. I wanted to have an opportunity to chime in and provide some insight from our perspective. And many have told me that coming here, I am stepping into a lion's den, and they wouldn't entirely be wrong. It certainly is a different environment than what many of the conversations that I typically have in our outreach efforts. But I think it's very valuable for us to be here, and I want to have a conversation with those in this room and those who aren't here today. I'm here because I really believe in dialogue and because Lyft is a collaborative company. We're providing a service that residents of your cities are using in rapidly growing numbers, and we're committed to working with you and your mayors and your city councils to craft modern legal frameworks for our operations that ensure important public safety objectives. It's clear that the swift rise of our services have created a period of rapid, unprecedented change, and this is creating a lot of tumult in the industries that you're responsible for regulating, and I empathize with that. I know it's created a lot of anxiety, and it's created difficulty on the part of the incumbent industries, as well as those of us who have to figure out how to put together a path forward. The drivers operating on our platform have provided more than 2 million rides in the last month alone, and we're growing 40% month over month. Consumers are voting with their dollars and with their downloads, and they're crying out for new options, for new choices. The voters in your cities are showing that they want different kinds of transportation experiences, greater service, quality, greater convenience, and they're asking you to be responsive to their needs and look past the inertia of what has been done before. Your city transportation planners, with whom we also have conversations, and your sustainability offices are trying to solve growing problems of traffic and parking congestion. They are encouraging urban residents to go car-free or adopt high-occupancy vehicle use. And from the beginning, our approach has been collaborative. I know we're not the only player in the marketplace. There are other companies that you may be dealing with as well. But I want you to come away with the knowledge that Lyft does not want to operate in a regulatory vacuum. Quite the contrary. It is a great frustration to us that there is not a clear category for us in the law in so many jurisdictions. I remember when Lyft was 1 month old. I worked with Lyft since the first day that we launched. And I was spending hours with our CEO, Logan Green, every day, himself a former elected transportation official in the city of Santa Barbara, researching whether it were even possible for us to apply for licensing under any of the existing models that the CPUC currently had created. It wasn't. On the form, they asked us questions like, how many vehicles do you own? And we sat there and we scratched our heads because we've never owned a vehicle. We're structured differently from existing transportation companies. We seek regulation, and we're working intensively with many of you in this room in cities and states across the country to develop new licensing categories that are designed for the characteristics of our model. There's an old saying that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But Lyft is not a nail. And we cannot exist within the licensing frameworks that were created decades ago for a different industry with different characteristics. I can say confidently that banning a smart code and GPS-enabled transportation network was not part of the legislative intent of your municipal policymakers because existing laws were written before the advent of this technology. Many of you may be more familiar with our competitors, so I want to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about Lyft. The biggest difference in the experience of using Lyft is not the app or the software. It's the ride itself and the driver. Lyft drivers are a much broader segment of the population than the taxi drivers we're used to regulating. The vast majority of drivers on our platform have other full-time employment and drive fewer than 15 hours per week.
She should be up there.
I'm sorry, we're gonna have to cut you off. I think though, you know.
Can I ask a question then just to conclude?
Yeah, you can ask a question, but I think out of respect to the panelists, that they get a chance to respond and maybe ask a question of you, because I mean, what you said, you guys are collaborative and want a dialogue. You don't see up here at the table, and so I think they've been very generous in letting you.
I appreciate that. I mentioned to Matt that I had longer remarks than a typical question, and so he encouraged
so
me.
If you want to ask a question, fine, but then I'd appreciate if you could, you know, hear the rebuttal, maybe take a question.
I'd be happy to. So I don't want to, use your time poorly. I think the thrust of my question is really about being responsive to consumer demand. Many of the details of these frameworks need to be worked out, but I wonder what the panelists believe is the appropriate response of policymakers to the fact that the vast majority of their consumers, the voters in these cities, are demanding access to these services and want them to be present in the marketplace. I think the genie's out of the bottle, so how would you suggest we respond to consumers?
I just want to say that it's proven, and I don't think that's a debate, and the city of New York had an injunction against you not to do that, to operate the city. That's not collaborative. So the myths that are perpetuated by the TNCs, I can give you many, and this is a perfect example of that. And I don't mind giving my time. I'm very happy to do that. I'm a little bit passionate about these things for a variety of reasons. But this is a perfect example. They don't come up and talk about it. They want to give a public service announcement. Why don't you come up and talk about it? Because you know that you're not right. Just because a consumer wants something, this is my 16-year-old son would like to buy beer, but I'm not so sure it's a good idea.
Can you hear me? What California did, in our opinion, and this, Wings operates in California. We're licensed and regulated and legal, and we are asking for permission. We're basically not in other states, and we want to be in every state. And we think that California was innovative in creating this new framework, and that is a good example that we're successful. That would be my answer to
If you want to ask a quick question.
Lyft as a carefully crafted image that it's one big kumbaya. But what is your federal strategy? And why are you guys even on Capitol Hill if you're here to have a cooperative attitude with regulators? Isn't it true that what you're trying to do is to get federal preemption so that everybody in this room actually has no say-so over anything about what you do? That's not very collaborative. In addition, to have started off right from the beginning, defining yourselves as ride sharers when you didn't share a single ride. I've been on the phone in phone interviews with, I'm blanking on the founder of your company's name, I apologize, where he talked about wheelchair service being right around the road, right around the corner. You guys provided 2 million trips and not one that was wheelchair accessible. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars. The cat's out of the bag because this is not an innovation move. This is a deregulation move coupled by a hundreds of millions of dollars marketing move. It's a move based on predatory pricing, driving your pricing down so far below taxi cabs that we can't possibly compete with our regulated price structure. So anyway.
I don't expect for you and I to leave this room saying kumbaya. I mean, we obviously have competing business models, and I understand that. And I don't believe that
mine follows the law, and yours is built exclusively on violating the law. Name one jurisdiction where you guys actually follow the law, the letter of the law everywhere, because don't start in California where you're illegally operating at airports. So what jurisdiction do you actually follow the letter of the law completely?
We are following with mandates of the CQC. I'd be happy to speak with any regulators who would like to have a
You're operating at the airport, you've already been called out upon it. So you can't name California, you gotta go to some other state, some other country.
On that note, that happy note, I think we'll bring it to a conclusion.